About a year ago, I heard Mark Whitacre's story at the Greenwood Mayor's Prayer Breakfast. And it was one of the most inspiring stories I had ever heard, a story of faith, a story of redemption, a story about prison, a story about so many good things. And when I was listening to his story, I thought, I wish he was speaking at our church. And so I immediately began to follow up with Mark and talk about a time that he could come share his story here. And so today is that day that it all worked out for him to come and share his testimony. And so his story is not necessarily a classic sermon per se, but you're going to see God's word and God's truth all throughout it today. And we've tried to abbreviate some things to give him as much time as possible to tell his amazing story. So would you welcome with me, give a great grace welcome to Mark Whitacre.
Thank you very much, Ginger. And my wife, Ginger, is here in the front row with me, and we are honored and privileged to be here. We were at the first service, and we really felt family. What a wonderful church family all of you have. So thank you for including us as part of your family here this morning, and also that worship music. I tell you, Ginger said, boy, we need to move to Greenwood, Indiana. We live in Cincinnati. It's a wonderful city, but she said, we're moving to Greenwood. So thanks for having us. Thanks for welcoming us, and thank you for the opportunity to share a journey with you. I know all of us go through adversity. How many of you been through adversity in your life? Has there been anybody? Yeah, most of you. And boy, I tell you what, if you don't have God in your life, we can be helpless and hopeless without God when we go through adversity. And we're all going to continue to go through adversity in our life. And if you're young and you haven't seen adversity yet, you will. And it's even more importantly when you have God in your life, because that's the only way you're going to get through it. And I'm going to share a real life journey that's happened the last 28 years in my family's life, Ginger and I and our 3 children, and how with God in her life, how he got through it. But I'm going to start this story about when I did not have God in my life, and when you're going through adversity, and how one normally would handle it if you don't have God in your life. So I'm going to start with that. And I tell you another thing, I like the worship music about where they were really singing about how the evidence is overwhelming that God is around us, that God is here. And I think in this story, you're also going to see that the evidence is overwhelming that God exists, especially for some of you maybe that doesn't have God yet in your heart. I think you're going to see the evidence is overwhelming that God does exist. And he's the only way to take life from ashes to beauty, the only way. Just imagine, again, we all go through different adversity, but just imagine if the adversity that you have, that you're going to work, and you go to work on Monday, tomorrow, and you have a tape recorder attached to your body with an athletic band, another tape recorder in a briefcase, and a tape recorder in a notebook, 3 different tape recorders, and you go to work and you're taping your supervisors, your friends, and your colleagues, and anybody around you that you're taping them, unbeknownst to them. Imagine doing that. Now imagine doing that 8, 9, 10 hours a day, every day for 3 years. Well, that's exactly what I did do when I was 32 years old. By the way, that was 5 years ago when I was 32 years old. No, I met with the FBI. It's 28 years ago, actually. I'm 60 years old. But I met with 4 FBI agents, 6 o'clock in the morning. They would shave my chest, hook microphones to my chest. Then they would have a tape recorder on my back with an athletic band, another tape recorder in a notebook, and a special tape recorder in a briefcase. 3 different recorders because it was such a large white-collar crime. They didn't want to miss anything. So they wanted me to capture that during those 8, 9 hours a day, and I did that every day for 3 years. Actually, if you go to the FBI Museum in Washington, D.C., it has the equipment I wore undercover in the museum because they've never had anybody wear a wire every day for 3 years. It's a record to do that. And by the way, it's a record you don't want to break either. But it's an interesting journey. It was a lot of stress and a lot of adversity during that time, and I really want to share how we got through it. I want to share how I became an informant, some huge mistakes that I made during the time I was an FBI informant, but especially want to share the last 20 years, what God has done in our lives since I've been an informant. The company I was wearing a wire against, the company that I was gaining evidence against, is known as ADM, Archer Daniels Midland. And I want to make it very clear that ADM today and ADM even then had 30,000 very hardworking employees doing the right thing morally and ethically every day. ADM is a wonderful company, then and now. 30,000 hardworking people. ADM was the 41st largest company in America today, and they were the 56th largest company in America in 1989 when I joined them. So it's this huge company with some wonderful people, headquartered in Decatur, Illinois. And Ginger and I have wonderful, wonderful memories of our time living there, the 8 years that we lived there, part of ADM. But there were 4 bad apples at the top. 4 guys that were all about greed, focusing their life on greed, was all about title, all about power, and I was one of those 4. So even though there were 30,000 hardworking people, there were 4 bad apples, and they were at the very top, and I was one of those. The position I had during that time, I was divisional president of the biotech division and corporate vice president of the company. So I was number 4 ranked executive out of 30,000 executives. We had a 75-year-old CEO, a 69-year-old president, and then me, 32. They all thought, boy, I've got a great future. I just got this 75-year-old and this 69-year-old above me. I just got to work hard and learn what they can teach me, and I can take their place someday, with my age difference being less than half their age. I remember my first week at work there in October of 1989. They gave me a jet. The top 7 executives each got their own jet. So I had a Falcon 50 given to me my first week at work, and boy, I tell you what, to have a Falcon 50 given to you, and you're 32 years old, I thought I was Justin Bieber. I actually had my Britney Spears, my Justin Bieber, my Charlie Sheen moment all in 1 month. I thought I was a rock star, and I had hair back then too, at 32. So it was. I really thought at that time, I was thinking, boy, if there's a heaven, this is probably it. I mean, look at this opportunity. My base salary was in the 6 figures with bonuses and stock options was in the 7 figures, and this is 1989. I remember my second week at work, I bought the CEO's, the home that he used to live in, the CEO's home, which is a mansion, a 13,000 square foot mansion with 8-car garage, 8 cars, and had a horse riding stables where your kids could ride in an inside arena for horses during the wintertime, 3 golf greens. I mean, this was a mansion. It was actually the original home. Our CEO lived in it for 30 years, and originally it was built by John Daniels, the founder of Archer Daniels Midland, 115 years earlier. So this was a really colonial, built in 1846, and Ginger did a lot of research on the home, and it's a home that Abe Lincoln had visited. It's a home that Gorbachev had visited. Mother Teresa even had a visit in that home with some of the predecessors before us living in that home. But again, that was my second week at work. 32 years old. And what's a 32-year-old do that's full of himself with an 8-car garage? You fill it up. I mean, literally, started there in October. By spring, I had a Ferrari, 2 BMWs, 2 Mercedes. Look out, Justin Bieber, here I come. That's what I was thinking during that time. So now I'm sure you're thinking, you said, Mark, you're number 4 executive out of 30,000 executives in the 56th largest company in America. Why in the heck would you wear a wire against your own company and testify and gain evidence against your own company when your future there is so bright? Well, the reason why I blew the whistle on ADM, the reason why I wore a wire against ADM, I should really say those 4 executives, because ADM wasn't doing anything wrong. It was 4 executives that were doing something wrong. Well, the reason why I did that is because Ginger. It's not because of me. I'm not really the whistleblower in that case. Ginger is really the whistleblower of that case. And I've known Ginger since she was 13 and I was 14. We met, she was 7th grade and I was in 8th grade. We'd go to the junior high dance, went to all the proms together. We were the prom king and queen. We were senior class president, I was, and she was treasurer of her class. We were gifted students. But even then, I look back, I was all about me. I was all about me. Boy, even then I can think of that I want to be CEO someday of one of the largest companies in the world, and I'm going to own this world. That's kind of how I was thinking even during that time and even before I went to college. So it was a very selfish life, and I think it got more selfish as I really got into a position of power. The example that I'm sharing with you is an example of selfish leadership, not servant leadership. So for the young people out there, I really want to emphasize, go for a life of significance, not a life of the way the world defines success. I had everything the world would define success. I had it all, a mansion, a jet, millions of dollars, and I can tell you it was an empty life People would drive by our home that we lived there for 8 years in that mansion, and they'd say, boy, Mark Whitacre's got it all. Look at that mansion and those 8 cars. I can tell you I had a void in my heart the size of Grand Canyon. If you're going after compensation and title and power, I'm telling you, you're going to have an empty life, because I had all of that, and it was empty. So it was November 5th, 1992. I'm 3 years with the company now, totally immersed in the company. Now our CEO is moving up close to 80 years old. He's 78 at that time. Our president was 72. So this is 3 years later that they're trusting me. The CEO and president treated me like a son of theirs. So Ginger set me down. It was November 5th, 92, and she said, Mark, what's going on with your life? I said, Ginger, we live in a mansion. We fly around on corporate jets. We got all the cars in the world. Our kids go to private schools. We got millions of dollars of stock options. I said, if there's a heaven, like I told you earlier, I was thinking, if there's a heaven, this is it. And she said, Mark, I can assure you this is not heaven. So as I'm getting obsessed and almost addicted to greed and materialism, Ginger was getting obsessed with Jesus, and her faith was growing. And as I'm sitting there trying to get bonuses in a bigger home and more cars, Ginger's in Bible study and pouring into other people. So we were really going 2 different tracks during that time. She would have been 34, and I would have been 35 years old at that time when we were having this conversation. And she said, Mark, the thing that bothered her the most was this. She said, Mark, I think you're an addict. I said, Ginger, an addict? I've never drank. I've never used drugs. So I can't be an addict. She said, Mark, there's other kinds of addicts besides drinking and drugs. And she said, you're a workaholic. You work from the minute you get up till the minute you go to bed. I said, Ginger, I have to work like that. 90%, not 10%, not 20%, 90% of my income compensation is in stock options and bonuses. So if I meet certain performance parameters, growth in revenues, growth in profits, if I meet those parameters, I get a lot higher income, 7 figures instead of 6 figures. And by that point, every year for the 7.5 years I was there, I met those parameters every year to get into 7 figures, because that was my obsession. That's all I could think about. She said, Mark, you work when you come home, when you're not traveling, and you're only home a couple weeks a month, and you come home and you're with her and our 3 children. She said, you have dinner with us, and then you're back working until you go to bed. You're on the phone 3 or 4 hours a night, especially the last 7 months. You've been there 3 years, Mark, but something's changed the last 7 months that you've been there. I said, Ginger, things have changed because now the CEO and president trust me. I've been there a couple of years. They see me like a son. So now they're starting to bring me into how they do business to kind of prepare me to take their place someday. And she said, well, tell me, how do they do business, Mark? What do they do business different than someone else? I said, well, they have a cartel. They're getting together with all their competitors. They've been doing it for 12 years. And they have a cartel, and they're fixing prices of several of the key ingredients that go into the foods that you would consume. A lot of the foods that you would consume or buy from the grocery store. A Kellogg's cereal, a Coca-Cola, an orange juice, Pillsbury cake mix, Kraft. It's difficult to buy a processed food that does not have something from ADM in it, one of the largest food ingredient companies in the world. She said, well, price fixing, what does that mean? She's a stay-at-home mom raising 3 young children. I said, well, they get together the competitors, and they'll split the market up, and some will take Hershey's, some will take Nestle's, some will take Coca-Cola, some will take Pepsi. They split the market up, and that way they can artificially inflate the prices like the oil companies did 50 years ago, a cartel, international cartel. So instead of competing against each other, they're really working together, which is illegal, breaking antitrust laws. She said, Mark, why would you do something illegal? I said, Ginger, they tell me that if you're in the commodity business, you have to do this. The only way you can survive is to do this practice that they're doing. So everybody's doing it. It's the only way to survive. So don't worry about it. They told me the politicians put these laws on the books. Politicians don't know anything what they're doing. They've never been in business. So these laws should have never been on the books in the first place. She said, boy, Mark, who pays for this price fixing? And how much is the company earning? I said, well, the company earns hundreds of millions of dollars a year extra, maybe even $1 billion a year extra. Been doing it for over a decade through this price fixing scheme. And I said, basically the consumers, all of you, when you go to the grocery store, you're paying for this when you buy foods, processed foods and beverages. She said, Mark, you mean my grandma earning $200 a month is paying for this? She said, I don't know if I can live with this, Mark. That's her biggest bill, is her grocery bill. And she's paying higher prices because of these ingredients being price fixed. And then she told me the thing I was hoping to never hear, because nothing ever came good out of it. She said, Mark, she was going to go back in her study and pray about it, and we talk about it when she was finished praying. And I knew then, when she said she was going to go back and pray about it, I knew there was nothing good going to come out of that. So she came back about an hour later, and she said, Mark, God led her to a decision. She said, Mark, you're involved with 7 months, that something's been going on for over a decade. You've only been in the company 3 years, and the crime was going over in a decade. What a perfect time to turn yourself in to the authorities. I said, Ginger, if I turn myself in, I could go to prison for breaking antitrust laws for price fixing with our competitors, which is illegal. And more so, our CEO is best friends with President Clinton. He picks up the phone and talks to President Clinton. He went to President Nixon's funeral on President Clinton's plane. These guys are billionaires, Ginger. They will smash us and make us regret we were ever born. I'm more afraid of the company executives than I am the government, I told her. And she said, Mark, God will protect us. I'm convinced if you do the right thing, God will protect us. But I can tell you what, Mark, you're going to do the right thing, and you're going to do it today. And I've known her since she's 13, and I knew she meant it. So I tried to talk her out of it for a couple hours, and finally she said, Mark, I'd rather be homeless than live in a house where illegal activity is occurring. And you're going to talk to the authorities today, or I'm calling them for you. So within a couple hours, we're sitting 4 hours with the FBI. I don't know how many of you ever went to the FBI and told them you're stealing $1 billion a year, but I can tell you that's an interesting reaction. That phone reached the Attorney General, which was Janet Reno at the time, the director of the FBI. This became the largest white-collar price-fixing case in U.S. history, started by a stay-at-home mom raising 3 young children. At the end of 4 hours, after confessing to this FBI what was going on, the agents, then Ginger acted like my lawyer, and we had no lawyer. We were naive and young, and we were naive about law enforcement. So we're just, her and I, with no attorney with us. And then Ginger said, well, look, my husband did the right thing. We go home now, right? The FBI said, your husband can't go home. He just confessed to a $1 billion crime a year that's been going over for a decade. And he's the only guy that confessed. We either have to arrest your husband today, or he has to start wearing a wire and become an informant tomorrow. And that's how I became an informant. And ladies and gentlemen, that's the difference between a whistleblower and an informant. A whistleblower is someone that's sacrificing everything to do the right thing. That's my wife, Ginger. An informant is someone in front of the FBI that has a choice to either go to jail or start wearing a wire. And that was me. And so when you read in the newspaper someone's been a whistleblower or someone has been an informant, there are 2 different distinctions between those 2. And Ginger was the whistleblower in this case. So that's how I became an informant. I don't have the normal resume of a white-collar criminal. Went to Ohio State University for my bachelor's and master's degree, full scholarship. Went to Cornell for a PhD in biochemistry, also full scholarship right out of high school, 8 years straight. But boy, I was all about myself. I was thinking, how can I use this education that I feel like I got, nothing to do with God's gift, that I felt that I got. How can I use this education to move up the corporate ladder as fast as I can? That's all I could think about during that time, especially during my PhD years at Cornell University. Now, I shared this slide at the Michigan Mayor's Prayer Breakfast. I met Wayne at the Greenwood Prayer Breakfast here last year on March 4th, and that's how we got to know each other, and that's how I was invited to come here. But the Michigan breakfast I spoke at a couple years earlier, Lansing, Michigan. I showed this slide, and there was a guy in the back of the audience, and I said, I don't have a normal resume of a white-collar criminal. And you know Michigan and Ohio State and the rivalry they have. He said, if you went to Ohio State University, you are a white-collar criminal. Stood right up in the audience and made that comment. So I don't show this slide in Michigan anymore, but I hope I'm safe to share it in Indiana. These meetings were all around the world. ADM felt safer, or the executives involved with this crime felt safer to have these meetings outside of the United States. Mexico City and Singapore and Vancouver and Hong Kong. And 2 or 3 meetings a month, we would meet with our 11 key competitors 2 or 3 times a month all around the world. And following around the world with us was this green lamp. The FBI knew they were going up against some billionaire executives, one of the largest companies in the world. So they wanted to show a jury what was going on, and the video camera was in this green lamp, the video camera. And because the FBI wanted to show something was going on versus just the tapes that I was making. The amazing thing is this video camera, I would tell the FBI where the meeting was going to take place, and they would get this green lamp inside that room. That green lamp was at the Shangri-La Hotel in Singapore, a $1,000 a night hotel with 11 guys, 5 feet from them, and they never noticed. 2 weeks later, the same green lamp was at the Mandarin Hotel in Hong Kong, same 11 guys, 5 feet from them. 4 weeks after that, the same green lamp was not far from here in Chicago at the Four Seasons Hotel, downtown Chicago. Same 11 guys sitting in the conference room, 5 feet from them, and they didn't see it. This green lamp was in 2 or 3 meetings a month for 3 years, and they never noticed that green lamp, 5 feet from them. 2 or 3 times a month for 3 years. I thank God we did not have a woman criminal among us. Because if we had a woman criminal among us, we were in trouble. Because you guys know, especially the guys know, if a woman would have saw that lamp, they would have said that lamp was following us around the world. But what it showed me with these 11 guys being an informant for 3 years, I would sit and observe and watch. I had 3 years knowing that lamp was there. What it showed me was this: greed blinds you. Greed blinds you. Any kind of addiction or obsession other than God, if it's on, it will blind you that you don't see what's 5 feet from you. They were so obsessed with dollar signs in their head, with the bonuses they were going to get from this price-fixing scheme, they didn't see what was 5 feet from them, which was this green lamp following them all around the world. Now, the FBI was so appreciative of me wearing a wire. When they wired me up, they'd say, "Mark, these guys are going to kill you if they catch you. This is serious stuff." Ginger even overheard this. This was serious stuff with them wiring me up every morning. And when they send me out, they said, "Mark, I'm telling you, you're dealing with guys from all around the world, billions of dollars at stake, and your life's in danger if they ever learn that you're wearing a wire against them." So this was a very stressful. Again, we're looking at adversities in our life. For me, this was the most adversity that I'd ever went through, and still in my life, the most adversity I ever went through in my life was wearing that wire for 3 years against some very powerful people. So in appreciation for that, within 4 months of wearing the wire, the FBI gave me full immunity. They met with the U.S. attorney, the lead prosecutor, full immunity, never be charged. So even those 7 months that I was involved with price fixing before I told them, they gave me immunity in turn for all the evidence I was collecting. Deal of a lifetime to have full immunity, never be charged in this case. All I had to do was stay out of my own way. Seems like it would be simple. I want to talk about how I got in my own way, and I want to talk about how I handled stress with not having God in my life. It's 3 in the morning during this horrific thunderstorm in Decatur, Illinois. 3 in the morning. It's 1994, so I've wore a wire 2 years by that point. I've had the wire on for 2 years. And there's a documentary on my website called Discovery Channel documentary called Undercover. It's done in 2010. It's the 4 real FBI agents, now all retired, and Ginger and I and all the real people involved in this case doing a documentary 20 years later on this case. It's pretty interesting. It's on markwhitacre.com, the full documentary. And the longest scene of this documentary is the scene I'm going to describe. They have actors reenact it. I'm 3 in the morning. I'm blowing leaves off the driveway during this horrific thunderstorm. 2 years wearing a wire. I had my shirt and tie on during that time, and the microphone still taped to my chest during this thunderstorm as I'm blowing leaves off. Ginger heard the gas leaf blower from our bedroom window. She comes running out, and she says, "Mark, it's 3 in the morning. You got to meet the FBI at 6. I said, "Ginger, I know I got to meet the FBI at 6. I've been meeting the FBI at 6 in the morning every day for 2 years." And I said, "It's all your fault that I have to meet them. You're the one that got me in this mess. It's easy for you to say, do the right thing. I'm the one wearing a wire year after year." So I'm blaming her for what's going on. She said, "Oh boy, Mark, you need God in your life. You need God in your life, and you're not going to survive this without God. You're 3 in the morning. You're having a nervous breakdown. You're having a meltdown. You're falling apart. You won't survive this without God." I said, "Ginger, why would I need God? I'm doing fine. This is the same thing the neighbors are doing." I looked around. There weren't many neighbors blowing their driveway off at 3 in the morning. She said, "Mark, I'm telling you, you can't survive this without Him. You're going to fall apart." I said, "Ginger, they just announced in Fortune magazine when our president retires, I'm taking his place. I'm going from divisional president to company president. I'm going from number 4 executive to number 2 executive when our president retires. Why would I need God?" I asked her. She said, "Boy, Mark, you really think you're going to be the next president? I said, Ginger, they announced it. It's in Fortune magazine. She said, Mark, the only reason why they announced you're the next president, they don't know you're the informant. The CEO, he's got 17 board of directors, and it's his son on the board, his daughter's on the board, his brother's on the board, his nephew's on the board. A lot of his family members are on the board. He's been there 30 years. When they learn you're the informant, they're going to fire you. Surely you don't think they're all going to go to jail and you're going to go to work like nothing happened. You got to realize you're going to work somewhere else when this is all over. I said, no, I think I'll survive this. She said, Mark, you're delusional. Every day you wear a wire further, you're falling apart. She went back in the house after I wouldn't listen to her very well, and I started thinking, she's right. There's no way I'm going to survive this. There's no way they're all going to go to prison. I'm just going to stay there and work there like nothing happened. So I looked around at that house and the 3 golf greens and the horse riding stables, and I thought, well, how am I going to keep maintaining this cost of living? I've had that job now for 7 years. How can I maintain that without having that job? When I get fired, are they going to give me a golden parachute? Probably not. Not when you're testifying against them in federal court. They're not going to give me anything. They're going to go after me with everything they have. So I thought, well, maybe I'll write my own golden parachute. They just announced I'll be the next president when the president retires. What a perfect time. The employees are scared to death of me, all 30,000 of them. I write my own checks. If they tell on me or tell the management, there's only 3 people above me, and if management comes to me and says, hey, Mark, you're stealing money from us, all I'd have to say is, you guys are stealing $1 billion a year for 12 years in a row. I was the safest guy in America. What could they do to me when they're involved with a bigger fraud? And then I thought, well, I had all these stock options that I couldn't exercise for a couple years, but I'm going to get fired before I can exercise them. But at least I could show a jury, if it does come up, I could show a jury that, well, look, I was going to get these millions of dollars 2 years later, but I took it now because I know I was going to get fired. And I thought that would be a good defense. By the way, it wasn't a good defense. I tried that defense. But I thought at the time it would be a good defense, that ADM was going to owe me that money down the road based on my exercise date for bonuses and stock options. So I went in the next day, wrote a $3.5 million check to myself. And then I wrote 4 other checks that added to $9 million, because that's what I thought my stock options based on that today's time was worth 2 years later. So I felt like that's worth what ADM was going to owe me 2 years from now. And I thought, boy, thank God I went to Cornell. Thank God I'm the smartest guy in this room. I got my severance package built. No one wants to hire a whistleblower. So that gives me 3 years to get back on my feet until I could get another job and making the same income I'm used to making the past 7 years. The very day that ADM learned that I was the informant, that very day, they called the FBI. They called Fortune magazine, they called Wall Street Journal, and they said, Mark Whitacre's no white knight informant. He stole $9 million from us the same time he worked for the FBI. So sure, I was okay with that when I worked for them, but once they saw I put them in flames, they were going to put me in flames. So they went to prison for breaking antitrust laws for price fixing, and I went to prison for that $9 million fraud that we just ended up telling each other, on each other, and going to prison for different things that we told on each other for. The amazing thing is, the 4 FBI agents came to our home, and when they heard about the $9 million, they said, Ginger and I down in the family room, they said, Mark, you had full immunity. We fought hard to get you full immunity. Why'd you do this? But then they quickly added, they said, Mark, we know you've been falling apart. Ginger's been telling us that you've been falling apart. She's been telling us that you can't sleep at night. And she's been telling us that during thunderstorms, you're blowing leaves off the driveway and brushing horses at 3 or 4 in the morning and still meeting us at 6 in the morning. So we know you've been having a meltdown. We should have never taken you undercover for 3 years. By the way, the guideline today by the FBI is don't take anybody undercover longer than a year, partly because of what happened in my case. And I've done 7 events for the FBI, including Quantico FBI Academy. So I've actually worked with them and given presentations on how to work with informants and how we could do it better than we did back then, what we've learned for the last 20 years since that experience. So they said, Mark, because of that, because we feel like we caused part of that meltdown by taking you undercover so long, we're going to go to the U.S. attorney, the lead prosecutor, and get you a plea agreement. It won't be immunity because of the $9 million, but we'll get you a plea agreement that will be the best we can get you. Well, my lawyer and those FBI agents went to meet with the U.S. attorney in Chicago, and they explained to the U.S. attorney, the lead prosecutor, what happened. And they said, look, Mark Whitacre helped solve a $12 billion crime. He made a $9 million mistake under pressure, but look what he helped resolve. He risked his life to do that. So they agreed to a Martha Stewart sentence. 6 months in federal prison, white-collar fence, white-collar, no razor wire, a white-collar, what's called a white-collar minimum security federal prison. Deal of a lifetime, 6 months in federal prison. So Ginger and I were with our lawyer. He had it where we could sign it, had 48 hours to sign it, 6 months in federal prison. And my lawyer said, Mark, this is a deal of a lifetime. Take it. Ginger begged me. She looked at me. She said, Mark, let's put it behind us. Take this 6-month plea agreement. I looked at Ginger and I said, Ginger, you're the one that got me in this mess in the first place. I'm going to do the opposite you want me to do. I took that plea agreement and threw it in a trash can. I fired that lawyer on the spot. I went out and hired more lawyers the next day, and I fought the case through the courts, federal courts, for 3 years to get a 10-year sentence instead. And I had a 6-month deal in my hand. Boy, I showed Ginger, didn't I? Biggest mistake I made in my life was the $9 million. The $9 million fraud. The next biggest mistake I ever made in my life was throwing that plea agreement in the trash can. Now I was going to have to do 8.5 years in federal prison. There's no parole in federal prison. You get 15% off good behavior, and that's the lowest you can get your sentence, because parole was taken out in the 80s. I was going to prison in 1998. So even though you hear about parole in state prisons, it doesn't exist in federal prison. So I was going to have to do 8.5 years out of a 10-year sentence and nothing less. And I would have had 6 months in a white-collar camp. So I went just like Martha Stewart and just like the Enron executives and WorldCom executives from a corporate jet on national TV to handcuffs and to prison for 8.5 years. I tell you what, I didn't want to live. Talking about an adversity where you feel hopeless and helpless, I gave up all hope at that time. That's where the movie ended, the movie The Informant that came out almost 10 years ago. That's the picture of Ginger and I with Matt Damon. I think you can see why they chose him, with he and I being identical twins. I'm the one on the right, by the way, if you don't know which one I am compared to Matt Damon. That's where the movie ended. They were not interested in the faith journey or some of the stories. The rest of the story we're going to share what's happened the last 20 years, but that's what I want to share. And what's happened? Did life end when I went to federal prison? I tell you what, I thought it was ending. I thought it was an end to life. But I want to share what's happened the last 20 years, what's happened since then. Several books have been written on the case, 3 very serious dramas, one called The Informant by New York Times, one called Rats in the Grain by an antitrust lawyer. One 10 years later came out in 2010 called Mark Whitacre Against All Odds. That's sold in Christian bookstores. That's our faith journey that kind of tells the rest of the story. The other 2 books came out before I was a Christian. They were my first few months in prison that those 2 books come out. And then Hollywood wanted to do a movie of one of the books. So The Informant was the book they chose from New York Times. And it was a serious drama. Reading The Informant is like reading a John Grisham like The Firm. But Hollywood turned it into a comedy. The FBI was not happy that it was a comedy, and therefore they did the documentary called Undercover by Discovery Channel that's on my website. 6 months after the movie, the documentary was done. And you can go to markwhitacre.com and see the documentary. Actually, the movie's actually linked on my website also, markwhitacre.com. So what's happened the last 20 years? I want to share that journey. Well, the first thing I did, I tried to kill myself. I pulled my car in one of those garages. I had a 17-page letter written to Ginger and my kids, and I said I wasn't willing to go to prison for 6 months. You can imagine how I felt for 8.5 years. And I pulled that car in that garage and tried to kill myself. Our groundskeeper came to our home to take care of our 15 acres because we had horses and so on, and he came at almost 8:30 or after every day. I wanted him to find me. Our garage was detached. It was a circular driveway. The house is on one side, the garage is on the other, and it's where the mowing equipment was. I wanted him to find me and not Ginger and our kids. So I tried to take my own life with the car running in the garage. Something tugged at his heart, and he came at 6:30 that morning after showing up at 8:30 or after for 8 years. Never came at 6:30. Something tugged at his heart, opened the garage. I was unconscious. I was hospitalized. The doctor said I was 20 minutes from passing, already unconscious, based on my carbon monoxide levels, 20 minutes. And he came at 6:30. If he would have came at 8:30 like he did for 8 years, I would have been passed. I would have been gone. I would have been dead, which is what I had planned. I was mad at him, actually, at that time for saving me because I didn't want to live. So I was very much mad at him. I was blaming everybody in the world, the FBI, ADM, Ginger, the groundskeeper. Everybody was blamed but me during this journey and during this time in my life. The amazing thing is I was hospitalized after trying to take my own life, hospitalized for a month, treated with heavy medication for post-traumatic stress disorder, some of the things that happen when you wear a wire for 3 years, treated, sent home, had a few months before I had to go to prison, had about 7 months before I had to go. And this man named Ian Howe, that's on this slide right here, he showed up. He was CFO of a large pharmaceutical company. His wife an attorney. They had 5 young children, school age and younger. So I know he didn't have the time to do this. He showed up at my house. It took him a while to even find out where we lived. We didn't know him at all. And he showed up at our home, and I was talking to him on the porch. I was just trying to take my own life a month earlier. All I was thinking about then, how could I take my life before I go to prison and this time do it right? That's all I was thinking. He showed up and he said, Mark, prison's going to be the beginning of your life, and you're going to find your true purpose in life with the journey you're ready to start. I ran back to the kitchen. I said, Ginger, there's somebody on the porch that's crazier than I am. She said, that can't be. First thing she said. Then I said, Ginger, he said, prison's going to be the beginning of my life, and I'm going to find my true purpose in my life with the journey I'm ready to start, and I'm getting ready to start 8.5 years in prison. She fell to her knees in tears, and she said, thank God. God sent somebody. She said, Mark, I've been trying to talk to you for 10 years. I've been praying for you for 10 years, and you never listened to one word I say about God. She said, I pray you go out and listen to this man who God sent to talk to you about God. I went out, and I said, Ian, what do you have in mind? He said, Mark, I'm going to introduce you to Jesus. I said, Ian, stop right there. My parents are Christians, so I'm Christians. You inherit it. And I said that they forced me to go to church as a youngster, and I've been going to church with Ginger and the kids almost my whole life since I grew up, since I left home. So I've been going to church my whole life. He said, Mark, I'm not talking about just going to church. I'm talking about having a relationship with Jesus Christ. I'm going to introduce you to him. I'm talking about having Jesus in your head, not just knowing who God is in your heart. No, having Jesus in your heart, not just knowing who God is in your head. I want to introduce you to Jesus where you have a personal relationship with Jesus in your heart. And I said, well, Ian, how do you do that? He said he had a study called Operation Timothy. He said, we're going to have Operation Timothy and a Bible. And he said, we're going to go through this. He said, I normally spend an hour a week with somebody when I disciple somebody. But Mark, you're leaving for a decade and 7 months. So he spent 6, 7, 8 hours a week with me, introduced me to Jesus. We started with the book of John. It started where Jesus died a horrific death, the Son of God, horrific death for our sins, for all of our sins. And Ian would tell me, he said, Mark, I don't care if your crime was a $9 million crime or $9 million or $9 billion or $90 billion. God will forgive you. You don't have to take your own life. God will forgive you. He will redeem you. And then we'd share other sins in my life. Some of them were even unethical but not illegal. And I was just sharing with him and sharing my heart. And it felt so good to get all this off my heart. And it started giving me hope. I wasn't there yet, but it started giving me hope. An important seed was planted. And then my second week in prison, Chuck Colson showed up. I don't know how many of you know Chuck Colson, but he was the White House counsel under President Nixon in the 70s. In his 32 years old, he had an office right next to the Oval Office. He was White House counsel. And by the time he was 40, he was in prison for $20 a month for the Watergate scandal. So he was reading about me, Chuck Colson. He didn't know me. We didn't know each other personally. He was reading about me in USA Today and Washington Post. He saw that I went to Cornell. He went to Brown, both of us Ivy League schools. He became a lawyer. I got a PhD in biochemistry, both of us doctorate level education. Both of us were top of our game at age 32, me in corporate America, him in politics. But both of us were in prison by the time we were in 40 at $20 a month. And he looked at me, he said, Mark, it was the best thing in the world ever happened to him. And he started sharing the same things Ian Howe was sharing with me for 7 months. He started sharing about Jesus dying on a cross for our sins, and Jesus is the Son of God. And the only way to have a relationship with God is through Jesus. And he said, Mark, what's stopping you from surrendering your life to Jesus? And I said, Chuck, my education, especially Cornell being a scientist, all I learned was there was no God. It was all about evolution and Darwinism, and it wasn't about creationism by God. It was the Big Bang Theory. It was all about that God did exist, my education, especially PhD level in a secular college. And he said, Mark, you think there's no scientist that believes in God? I said, Chuck, I don't think there's any scientist that believes in God. And he started sending me article after article. He sent so many I couldn't read enough of them. He sent me where Albert Einstein said only God could create the universe and man. The Big Bang Theory was impossible. Albert Einstein, a guy who I had great respect for. He sent me the memoirs of Sir Isaac Newton that even had a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, a famous scientist that I had a lot of respect for. And then he sent me a book of a living scientist that still even lives today. And this book was sent to me in '98 during my first month in prison. And it was a book called Surprised by Faith. And this is a famous scientist named Don Bierle, B-I-E-R-L-E. And this scientist was trying to prove to all his friends that God didn't exist. And he spent hours on evenings and weekends researching everything he could as a scientist that God does not exist. At the end of his research, it proved to him that God does exist. And he wrote the book called Surprised by Faith, that God does exist. And he sent me that book, and it brought me to my knees because it showed me that everything that Ian Howes and Chuck were sharing with me in the Bible is true. There is no doubt in my mind, especially after I read that book, there is no doubt in my mind about God existing. God does exist. And I'm an Ivy League PhD scientist standing on this stage saying God does exist. And I've sent that book to many scientists, and I've never seen as many scientists that became of Christians because of that book, sharing the evidence that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and God does exist. And the Surprised by Faith by Don Bierle, that was life-changing. So that made the scriptures come alive to me. So then during my quiet time, I keep reading scripture and keep learning because now I knew it was all true. So my third month in prison, a couple months after Chuck Colson pouring into me, and 9 months after Ian Howes was pouring into me, in a 10 by 10 and a concrete floor, my third month in prison, I surrendered my life to Jesus. And I became a free man my third month in prison, and I had 8 years to go, and I was a free man. And I was in prison to that previous life, the prison of that life of greed. That was prison. I was a free man when I was in what we would call a prison, but I was a free man because I had Jesus in my heart and God in my life. Then during my quiet time in the morning, I'd say, God, I have 8.5 years yet to go. What am I going to do? How am I going to find my purpose here in prison? I'm only my third month in prison. I have over 8 years yet to go. What can I do that has purpose in my life to serve you? And I looked at that Bible, and I looked at that Operation Timothy book, which was an introduction to the Bible, the program that they happened to use, introduced me to Jesus. And I looked at that, and I thought, what a better place where people more helpless and hopeless than federal prison. And I started taking guys one by one through Bible study, and I took 61 guys one by one through Bible study, just like Chuck Colson was doing me. And led them where Jesus could do his work. Because all we do is introduce. We plant seeds. Only God can do the work in someone's heart. The most productive years in my life were 9 years in federal prison, from age 41 to age 49. I helped these guys get their GEDs, helped them learn how to read, learn how to write. Ginger and I went to a graduation a couple years ago. We saw one graduate #1 in his class in marketing at a university in Florida. He was an 8th grade dropout when I met him. I helped him get his GED in prison. I took him through Bible study, helped introduce him to Jesus. I helped him get a 2-year degree in prison through correspondence, a 2-year college degree. Now he was married and a child, and he was #1 in his class, getting his 4-year degree in marketing, #1 in his class. And I walked away and I told Ginger, there is nothing more rewarding than that. No corporate jet, no mansion, no Ferrari like I had, nothing more rewarding than that. to help somebody else. It took me going to prison to learn what a servant leader even is. And I thank God today for the 9 years I had in federal prison. I thank God for him because I needed that lesson to learn the difference between a servant leader and a selfish leader. So God redeemed me, and he pardoned me on June 4th, 98. And then he put in my heart how I could serve in the prison where people are more helpless and hopeless than anywhere in the world. Prisons are people lose their families. The divorce rate in prison is 78%. If you serve 5 years and longer, it's 99% divorce rate if you serve 5 years and longer. So most of them lost their wives, their families. Most of them are going to have problems with employment when they get out. Some of them didn't even have a high school education. I mean, it was a dark place. And God brought light in that prison where I was able to serve them. And then I saw light in their lives. And it was amazing to see that prison transform. I was starting to think by the time I left, that was a church, not a prison. And we still keep in touch with those guys. And I left 12 years ago, that prison. I've been out since 2006. With God in your life and with adversity in your life, you will get better, not bitter. Our family, Ginger and I and our 3 children, even with the adversities we went through, we got better, not bitter. Not only did we survive, we thrived because we have God in our life. And the only difference between the words better and bitter is the letter E in better for eternal value. So I know you're all going to go through adversity, and you're all going through adversity, but God will get you through it. He will take your life from ashes to beauty. And Ginger and I saw it firsthand and saw the evidence in our own lives by taking them from ashes to beauty. God forgave me and pardoned me on that June 4th, 98. And then he touched the hearts of Ginger and our children to forgive me. Ginger moved to Yazoo, Mississippi when I was moved there, my first prison. And she came every Friday evening and every Saturday and Sunday the entire time I was there. Then I got moved with good behavior to a prison in Edgefield, South Carolina. Ginger and my children moved to Edgefield, South Carolina. She came every Friday evening and every Saturday and Sunday. The family's not allowed to come during the week. And when they come, they sit in a visiting room with a guard in the corner. And she came every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday in Edgefield, South Carolina, the 3 years I was there. The last 5 years of my prison time with good behavior got me moved to Pensacola Navy base with the Navy for my last 5 years. And Ginger and my kids moved there and visited me every Friday evening, every Saturday and Sunday. The entire 8.5 years in prison, she moved to 3 states to live almost walking distance from 3 prisons with a 99% divorce rate. There were about 5 wives out of 700 inmates come, and Ginger and my kids were there every weekend. A miracle of God. I can remember my first Christmas in prison at Yazoo, and I'm sad and crying because I had 8 more Christmases to go. This was 1998, and my kids were crying and sad and depressed. And Ginger said, "Why are you guys feeling depressed?" I said, "Ginger, I got 8 more Christmases to go, and we're sitting here in a visiting room in prison. This is our first one. This is 1998. I don't get out till 2006." And Ginger looked at me and the kid, and she said this: "What's it matter if we're in a living room or a prison visiting room? We're together. And that's all that counts." And I'll never forget her saying that. She said, "Look at the people in the military that aren't even with their families, can't even be with their families. What a blessing it is to be together, even if it's in a concrete floor in a visiting room of a federal prison." And that's the attitude Ginger had for 9 years, who moved to 3 different states, who came every hour that visiting room was open for family members. She was there. A miracle of God. I wake up in the morning, and I look in that mirror, and I think of what I put my family through for 3 years wearing a wire and 9 years of prison, and I thank God that God blessed me with Ginger. Because I put her and my kids through a living hell, and the fact that they stayed with me and even love me today is a miracle. There's my family today. Ginger and I with our children, 2 of them now married, and they love me. And I watched my son, the youngest one who went through the most hardships. He was 6 when I wore a wire. I remember him asking Ginger one day, he said, "Does Dad come home today or do they kill him today?" Because he'd hear all this about how dangerous this was, what I was doing. He was 6 years old. He's 32 years old now, and I watched him about a year ago at a 100-man event. He was given at a CBMC, giving his testimony, and I watched my son stand up now, 32, and he started off his presentation, his testimony, saying, "Thank God my dad went to prison. I got to spend 20 hours a weekend with him for 9 years." He said, "My dad didn't even know what grade I was in before, but I got to spend 20 hours a weekend for 9 years, and how blessed he was. A miracle that my kids have forgiven me and love me today, and I don't take that lightly." The food companies that we were stealing from, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Kraft, Hershey's, Nestle's, with the legal fees I had to pay the $9 million back. I had to pay $2 million interest on the $9 million. I had millions of dollars of legal fees. We lost everything we had. Sold the houses and cars to pay lawyers. Ginger was about ready to move back at home, being a stay-at-home mom with her mom in Cincinnati, which is where we live now. She was about ready to move back at home with her mom, with our kids, because we were running out of money. August 98, my 5th month in prison, she got a call. The companies that were ripped off from the price fixing from ADM got paid hundreds of millions of dollars back in reimbursement. Coca-Cola alone was paid back $400 million. Procter & Gamble, $100 million. Tyson Food, $80 million, and on and on and on. They got together. One of them was a Christian at Tyson Foods, got the other guys from the other companies, the general counsels on the line, and said, "You guys, we just got reimbursed for price fixing. We're a stay-at-home mom raising 3 young children. It would still be going on today if it wasn't for Ginger Whitacre." And they put a trust fund together and a whistleblower reward to finance her the 9 years I was in federal prison. The companies I stole from took care of my family for 9 years. A miracle of God. The statistics was against me in all these. I thought I'd never get a job. Another reason why I tried to take my own life, who's going to hire somebody at age 49, convicted felon? May as well not live. That's why I tried to take my own life. I thought I wouldn't have a family with a 99% divorce rate. Who's going to hire a convicted felon at age 49? Why live? Cornell University, a couple professors, Christians, started visiting me in prison. They started introducing me to biotech companies and pharmaceutical companies in prison, just like a recruiting ground at a college university. And they started bringing them to prison to meet me, and they had 4 offers for me the day I got out of prison in 2006, 4 offers. Now, you don't start off the head of finance when you steal $9 million. But they had a job for me as a PhD scientist. I've worked at that company now 12 years. I've had 4 promotions, and now I'm the COO, the number 2 executive of a prostate cancer research company, the number 2 executive. Miracle of God. Statistics was against me. Statistics was against me in all of those things. You think the FBI agents would throw away the key and want to forget about me forever? Think about it. I stole $9 million when I worked with the FBI. They got me a 6-month plea agreement, and I threw it in a trash can. You'd think they'd say, "Forget about that guy forever." Even God touched their hearts to forgive me. And I want to share a short 1-minute video from the head of the FBI of that case, now retired, but was the head of the FBI during that time, where he shares where God touched his heart to forgive me. I'm going to share this now.
Dean Paisley is what you'd expect a 25-year veteran of the FBI to be. He's a very honest, straight shooter, and he knows Mark Whitacre very well. He was the FBI supervisor in the ADM Mark Whitacre price-fixing case, and he says this question mark should not be on this title. He says that he has no question that Mark Whitacre is a national hero. But in the early 1990s, Mark Whitacre was keeping a $9 million secret from Dean Paisley, and it was a secret he would regret.
My biggest regret would be that I didn't tell the FBI about the money issue during the time that I was working with the FBI.
But those in the FBI who were working with Mark Whitacre to build a case against ADM were shocked when their own informant was sent to prison for 9 years.
It was the first time in history that anybody had been a cooperative witness for the FBI and was prosecuted in the same case that they were assisting. It doesn't make sense.
Dean Paisley worked for the FBI for 25 years. He was the FBI supervisor during the Mark Whitacre ADM case. He is not a fan of the movie The Informant.
I know from experience going through that it wasn't a comedy. It was anything but a comedy.
Would you be willing to wear a wire? We need your help.
And the 25-year FBI veteran is also not laughing at the treatment that Mark Whitacre has received.
I always felt that he didn't get a fair shake, either from the FBI or the system. He didn't deserve all that happened to him.
Dean Paisley is now working to get a presidential pardon for Mark Whitacre, who he says is a national hero.
He helped every citizen in this world that ever bought any product from ADM. Had he not stolen that $9 million, he would have been a national hero at the highest levels, really.
Dean Paisley says he and the other main FBI officers who worked this case are now pressing for a full presidential pardon for Mark Whitacre. And at least one prosecutor who helped send Whitacre to prison is also helping in their effort.
A miracle of God. Think about how they would feel of all the mistakes I made during that time. For them to forgive me like that and be a cheerleader and support me, that can only happen with God touching hearts. When I look at all the things, when I look back in the last 20 years in His journey since I brought God in my life, since June 4th, 1998, be 20 years this June, and when I look back about how a married survivor, we're married 39 years, and we were 9 years in prison with a 99% divorce rate statistic. It shows God don't care about statistics. The companies I stole from took care of my family financially for 9 years. Put our kids through college. Put Ginger back in school to be a teacher. She was Teacher of the Year of our city in 2007. Paid for to go to college by the guys that were the victims in this case, by the companies that were the victims. For her to go to college at age 40 to become a teacher. The FBI agents to forgive me. For me to get a job the day I got out to prison and a second chance to have my career, but this time God's way instead of my way in a career. I've seen the evidence. I don't live on faith alone anymore. As a scientist, I live on evidence. And I've seen the evidence in our own lives. God does exist. He took our lives from ashes to beauty. And it's the most important decision I've ever made in my life. I feel my purpose in life is to be a witness for Jesus. Sure, I have a job and keep a roof over a family's head. But I tell you, a job is just a job. Before I was consumed with it when I was at ADM. It was everything. Today, I really feel my purpose in my life is to go around like this. I do 7 or 8 events like this a month. 96 last year and 94 booked already this year. I even did one in Jerusalem. I did one in Bogota. I did one in Singapore. I feel my purpose in my life as a witness for Jesus Christ, and I'm going to get on a plane and go to 7 or 8 cities a month till I can't get on a plane anymore. Because I believe God, as a scientist, wants me to be a witness for Him, how He took our life from ashes to beauty. And if you don't have God in your life, I urge you to pray and explore and learn more about that, to get to know who God is and get to know Jesus. Because it will be the most important decision you made in your life. And I would like to end in the prayer I prayed on June 4th, 1998. When I invited Jesus in my life, my 3rd month of federal prison, when I had over 8 years yet to go. And I like to end with prayer. And if you'd like to invite God into your life, please pray along with me in silence and invite God into your life and surrender your life to Him. And if you have God in your life already, please feel free to pray along with me in silence to renew, re-energize your relationship with Him. So pray along with me in silence, but I'm going to pray the prayer I prayed on June 4th, 98. Father, I'm a sinner. And I've made a train wreck of my life, Father. And I know now, Father, that your Son, Jesus, died a horrific death on the cross for my sins. I know, Father, that your Son was resurrected 3 days after His death. And He's with you in heaven today. And I will have eternal life with you when my life here is finished by having you in my life. So I know the key, Father, to you is your Son, Jesus. He's the bridge. Jesus is the bridge to you, Father. So I just pray, Father, you continue to keep me on track. Thank you for taking my life from ashes to beauty. I pray, Father, you keep me out of my own way. And I pray, Father, for the audience here today, if they don't know you, that they get to know you and have you in their heart also. And if they do know you already, Father, I pray that they leave here with more passion in their life to serve you. Father, I pray that in Jesus' strong name. Amen. I'd just like to share, we've done several interviews, especially in 2009 when the movie came out 9 years ago. And I know Ginger was on national TV on several of those interviews. And one of the interviews they asked Ginger, they asked her this. They said, Ginger, divorce rate is 99%. How'd you do it? How'd you do it when no one else can? Ginger said divorce was never an option. She said God told her to love me even when she didn't want to love me unconditionally. God told her to love me. She said divorce was never an option, but she said murder was an option, and she considered it twice. On national TV, she said that. Then they asked her this. They said, Ginger, murder was an option. When'd you want to kill him? She said, well, the first time I wanted to kill him when I heard about $9 million he wrote to himself at a time he was wearing a wire for 3 years for the FBI. What a stupid thing to do. And then she said another time she wanted to kill me when I threw a 6-month plea agreement in the trash can. And then they asked her. They said, Ginger, what would have happened if your husband signed that 6-month plea agreement? She said, you know, I thought about that a lot over the last decades. My husband would have came out the same greedy man he went in with a 6-month Martha Stewart sentence. He would have never listened to Ian Howe. He would have never listened to Chuck Colson if he only had a 6-month sentence. He needed to be broken and have all the distractions out of the way. And she said, thank God, gave him a 9-year sentence because he gave him exactly what he needed. I think 2 years would have been enough. But I do know this, 6 months would have not been enough. And I thank God that he did give me what I need. And I thank God that I have the opportunity to serve him. And I'm going to serve him till I join him in heaven. God bless all of you. Thanks for having us.
I want you to stay standing. Everybody stay standing for just 1 second. Come right back up here, Mark. I want to say, first of all, if you're here today and you say, Mark, I'm praying that prayer. I'm beginning a relationship with Jesus. If you'd like to know more about what that means and what that looks like, on your way out today at the red information tent, stop by there. We could give you some information, a Bible, and help you on your journey of following Jesus. Because one thing I take away from your story is that following Jesus, it's a process, it's a journey. It's not just this one moment. It begins with a moment, but it's a process, it's a journey. So I encourage everybody to do that. We're running real late, but I promise only to take 2 minutes. But I feel like the Holy Spirit could really follow this up. Everybody's here on purpose. I think everybody's got to ask themselves, why are you here today? And I think the Holy Spirit is speaking to so many of you, but I want to follow up with 2 things. First of all, I think there are some people here, they may not be in federal prison, but they're in the process of being broken, Mark. And it's hard for them to see the future. It's hard for them to see hope. What would you say to those people here today? They're maybe in a prison of their own making. Maybe they're in a difficult situation with family or business or whatever. How would you encourage them today?
I would say this. I was exactly, if you feel that way, I was there. I was in that prison to life, the way the world defines life, the way the world defines success. I was in that life. And that is prison. And in reality, I thought I was broken when I went to prison. That's when I was broken. And until I had God in my life, even in prison at $20 a month for 8.5 years, that's when I was unbroken. That's when God redeemed me and forgave me and gave me a second chance. So if you're feeling like that, I can tell you the only answer is God, is the only answer. God in your heart and a relationship with Jesus Christ is the only way.
Amen. One more question. You were dealing with billions of dollars, and most of us will never have that problem of dealing with billions of dollars. But when it comes to integrity, especially when it comes about money, there's some people who own businesses, people who work for other people. Everybody's doing it as far as things that maybe maybe they just don't have integrity, or we're starting to say, hey, it's popular or it's accepted that people do that. Talk about how little things can become major things.
Well, our crimes at ADM, they didn't start off with billion-dollar crimes. They start off with $10, then $100, then $1,000. You get comfortable with it. A few years later, it's a billion-dollar-a-year crime. But it started off small. And I will tell you this, and I can tell you firsthand, when I got involved 7 months before I shared with Ginger about the price fixing, which I knew we were stealing from our own customers, the companies that make foods that sell to you in the grocery store, I look in that mirror each day, and that was prison. It weighed on my heart to say, we're already a successful company. We're already wealthy. The executives are already wealthy. Why are we doing this? If I would have never been caught, or if I never shared it with Ginger, it would have never come up. I think it would have been even a worse life, a broken life. Because you have to look in that mirror and think about what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. And you know what you're doing. And you're going to look in that mirror like I did and say, boy, this is not right. I wasn't even a Christian then, and I knew it wasn't right. And it was breaking my heart. That's why Ginger talked to me in the first place. She could tell something was weighing on me, that something changed those last 7 months when I was involved with that crime before I shared with her. So if you're doing anything, no matter how small, small becomes large. If you're doing anything at all, it's so important to bring Jesus in your life and to stop doing it. God will forgive you for whatever you're doing. We all sin. We all fall short of God, but God will forgive you. But I've learned the only thing to do is the right thing. And also I've learned this is, no matter what we do, God sees it. When I went back and wrote those checks, I'm not hiding in another room where God don't see it. God's everywhere. He sees what we all do. So do the right thing, ask God for forgiveness, and God will forgive you.
Amen. One more time, say thank you to Mark.